I never thought I'd find myself in this position, recounting the betrayal that shattered my life. It began like any other Wednesday. I was heading home from work, eager to unwind after a long day. Little did I know, my world was about to collapse. When I arrived, the front door was ajar. Panic surged through me as I rushed inside, calling out for my wife. The house was in disarray. Drawers ransacked, valuables missing. Our safe, hidden behind a painting, was open and empty. Jewelry, cash, important documents, all gone. My wife appeared from the bedroom, her face a mask of shock and concern. "What happened?" she gasped, feigning ignorance. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, and in my state of disbelief, I bought it. "We've been robbed," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. We called the police, who conducted a cursory investigation. They found no signs of forced entry, suggesting that whoever did this had access to our home. My wife played the role of the distressed spouse to perfection, even managing a few tears. On the other hand, was numb. It didn't make sense. No broken windows, no picked locks. As the days passed, she became increasingly distant, spending more time on her phone, whispering hushed conversations when she thought I wasn't listening. My gut told me something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. A week later, I was at my wit's end, unable to sleep. I roamed the house, ending up in our study. That's when I noticed the slight misalignment of the books on the shelf, a hidden compartment only we knew about. Inside, I found a burner phone, still on, with a string of messages that made my blood run cold. "Everything's set. He suspects nothing. Soon we'll be free and rich." The texts were between my wife and someone named Jay. They had orchestrated the robbery, planned it down to the last detail. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had not only robbed me but was planning to leave me for her lover. But she didn't know I knew, not yet, and I intended to keep it that way until the time was right. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I had a plan to make her and her accomplice pay. I would make them confess, beg for forgiveness, and turn themselves in. For that, I needed a meticulous strategy. First on the list, gather more evidence without raising suspicion. I needed to know everything about this Jay and their plans. I would bide my time, pretending to be the oblivious husband while setting my trap. The game was on. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound determination. I had to act normal, like I was still in the dark about everything. The hardest part was looking at my wife and pretending I didn't know she had betrayed me. Her expressions of concern about the robbery were almost laughable, but I had to play along. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Not really," I replied, forcing a smile. "Still on edge about everything?" She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I know, honey, we'll get through this together." It took every ounce of self-control not to pull away. I hope so. At work, I couldn't focus. My mind was racing with ideas on how to gather more evidence. That evening, I decided to start with the burner phone. I needed to know who Jay was, where he lived, and how deep their relationship went. After dinner, I pretended to go to bed early. Once my wife was asleep, I retrieved the burner phone and started digging. It was surprisingly easy to crack the password, a combination of our wedding date and her lover's initials. The messages were a treasure trove of information. Jay was someone she had met a few months ago, and their affair had quickly escalated. They planned to leave the country as soon as they had enough money, which explained the robbery. The next step was finding out more about Jay. I cross-referenced his number with some contacts I knew, eventually tracing it back to a guy who worked at a nearby construction site. He seemed like an ordinary guy, but he had somehow wormed his way into my wife's life and turned her against me. I needed to confront Jay, but not yet. I had to be smart about this. I wanted them to turn on each other, to make them so paranoid that they'd slip up and reveal their true nature. In the meantime, I installed hidden cameras around the house to catch any incriminating conversations or actions. It was a bit tricky, but I managed to set them up in strategic locations: the living room, the kitchen, and our bedroom. Over the next few days, I continued to play my part. I pretended to go on business trips, giving me the perfect cover to gather more evidence. My wife didn't seem to suspect a thing. In fact, she seemed relieved when I left, probably thinking it gave her more freedom to plan her escape with Jay. I spent my business trips tailing Jay. I learned his routines, where he lived, and who he hung out with. He was a nobody, a loser who had somehow convinced my wife that he was her ticket to a better life. Watching him made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. The time for confrontation would come, but only when I was ready. One night, after a particularly long day of surveillance, I reviewed the footage from the hidden cameras. That's when I struck gold. My wife was on the phone with Jay, discussing their plans in detail. She mentioned a stash of money they had hidden and their plan to buy plane tickets under fake names. They were going to make their move in 2 weeks. Perfect. That gave me enough time to set my trap. I needed to push them to the brink, make them so desperate that they'd start making mistakes. I started leaving little hints around the house, moving things slightly, leaving my computer open to news articles about police cracking down on fraud, and dropping subtle comments about feeling like we were being watched. It worked. I could see the tension in my wife's eyes growing. She started to get paranoid, snapping at me for the smallest things. Spending hours on the phone with Jay, they were beginning to crack. Soon, it would be time for the final act. I would confront them with all the evidence, force them to confess, and then let the police handle the rest. But for now, I had to keep playing the role of the clueless husband, all while preparing for the moment I'd finally get my revenge. The decision to throw an anniversary party for my wife was brilliant in its simplicity. It would allow me to gather both her and Jay under one roof without raising suspicion. The idea of celebrating our love while knowing the truth about her betrayal was deliciously ironic. The preparations began with fervor. I booked a small banquet hall, arranged for catering, and sent out invitations to close friends and family. Everyone thought it was a heartfelt gesture, a way to rekindle the romance after the recent upheaval. Little did they know, it was the final act in my carefully orchestrated plan. My wife was shocked when I told her about the party. "You did all this for me?" she asked, eyes wide with surprise. "Of course," I replied, forcing a loving smile. "After everything we've been through, I thought we could use a fresh start." She hugged me, but I could feel the tension in her body. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means a lot." Jay was the wild card. Inviting him would be tricky. I couldn't just call him up and ask him to come. Instead, I devised a plan to ensure his attendance without alerting my wife. Using the burner phone, I sent a message from my wife's number. "Surprise anniversary party this Saturday. Need you there. We can slip away after." The reply came almost instantly. "I'll be there." With both of them committed to the event, I moved to the next phase, ensuring they had no escape. I hired a couple of private security officers under the guise of needing extra protection after the robbery. They were instructed to monitor the exits discreetly and not to interfere unless absolutely necessary. On the day of the party, I played the role of the doting husband perfectly. I fussed over the decorations, double-checked the seating arrangements, and made sure everything was perfect. My wife, meanwhile, was a bundle of nerves, barely able to maintain her composure. As guests began to arrive, I kept an eye out for Jay. He showed up fashionably late, trying to blend in with the crowd. My wife's eyes darted to him the moment he walked in, and I caught the slight nod she gave him, a silent acknowledgement of his presence. The party was in full swing, and I made sure to keep the atmosphere light and cheerful. Toasts were made, glasses were raised, and laughter filled the air. All the while, I watched my wife and Jay exchange furtive glances, growing more anxious with each passing minute. When the time was right, I took the microphone and called for everyone's attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady. "This party is a celebration of love and commitment, something that I value deeply." My wife's smile wavered, but she quickly recovered, beaming at the guests. "But sometimes," I continued, "commitment can be tested in the most unexpected ways, and it's in those moments that we truly see a person's character." A murmur rippled through the crowd as I turned to face my wife. "I've recently learned that trust can be broken, and betrayal can come from the ones we hold dearest." Her smile faded completely, replaced by a look of pure terror. "And tonight," I said, locking eyes with her, "I want to reveal the truth." I signaled to the security officers, who stepped forward, blocking the exits. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. "Darling," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, "would you care to explain why you and our guest of honor, Jay, thought it was a good idea to rob me and plan your escape together?" Gasps echoed through the room as the color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. I pulled out the burner phone and played a recording of one of their conversations, the incriminating evidence echoing off the walls. The guests were stunned, whispering among themselves as my wife and Jay stood frozen in place. "Confess," I demanded, my voice cold and unyielding. "Tell everyone the truth." My wife broke down first, tears streaming down her face as she sobbed. "It was a mistake," she cried. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Jay tried to make a run for it, but the security officers were ready. They grabbed him, forcing him to his knees beside my wife. "You're both going to confess," I said, "and then you're going to face the consequences." The party was over, but the real show was just beginning. As my wife and her lover realized the gravity of their situation, I felt a grim satisfaction wash over me. Justice would be served, and I would finally have my revenge. The room was silent except for my wife's sobbing and the guests' shocked whispers. The revelation had stunned everyone into silence. I stepped forward, maintaining my composure while relishing the sight of my wife and her lover brought to their knees. "Explain yourselves," I demanded, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. My wife looked up at me, her eyes pleading for mercy. "It started a few months ago," she began, her voice trembling. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. We were just talking at first, but then it turned into something more." "Talking?" I scoffed. "You planned to rob me and run away together. That's more than just talking." She flinched at the harshness of my tone. "I know," she whispered. "It was a mistake. I thought we could be happy together, that we could start a new life." "Happy?" I repeated, incredulous. "At the expense of everything we built together?" "Jay," I said, turning to her lover. "Anything to add?" He glared at me, defiant despite his predicament. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he spat. "We were desperate. We needed the money, and she said you wouldn't understand." "Understand?" I laughed bitterly. "What's there to understand? You both betrayed me and thought you could get away with it." The guests were murmuring louder now, their disbelief turning to outrage. Friends and family members who had once admired my wife now looked at her with disgust and disappointment. "I want you both to confess," I said, my voice firm. "Tell everyone here what you did and why you did it." My wife looked around the room, her eyes pleading for sympathy. I was unhappy," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I felt trapped in our marriage. When I met him, he made me feel alive again. We started talking, and it turned into an affair. We thought if we had the money, we could start over somewhere new." Jay nodded, still defiant, but less sure of himself. "She said you wouldn't miss the money, that you had more than enough, and that we could disappear without a trace." "You planned to rob me, leave me with nothing, and disappear?" I asked, my voice rising with each word. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" My wife broke down, her sobs racking her body. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I was stupid and selfish. I didn't think about the consequences." "And you," I said, pointing at Jay, "what's your excuse?" He looked away, his bravado crumbling. "I was desperate," he muttered. "I needed the money, and she promised me a way out." The guests were now openly expressing their outrage, some yelling at my wife and Jay, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The security officers remained vigilant, ensuring neither of them could make a run for it. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of grim satisfaction. They had confessed, and now it was time for the final step. "You will both go to the police," I said. "You will tell them everything, and you will face the consequences of your actions." My wife looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. "Please," she begged. "Isn't there another way? Can't we fix this?" "No," I said firmly. "Some things can't be fixed. This is the path you chose, and now you must walk it." I turned to the security officers and nodded. They stepped forward, taking hold of my wife and Jay. The guests parted, watching in stunned silence as they were led out of the hall. As the doors closed behind them, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The betrayal had been exposed, and justice would be served. But more than that, I felt a sense of closure. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. But I had faced the truth and come out stronger. I turned to the remaining guests, who were still processing what had happened. "Thank you all for coming," I said. "I know this isn't the anniversary celebration we expected, but it was necessary. Sometimes the truth is painful, but it's better than living a lie." With that, I left the hall, leaving behind the whispers and the shock. I had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally move forward. In the days that followed, the fallout from the party was immense. Gossip spread like wildfire through our social circles, and my phone was constantly buzzing with calls and messages from concerned friends and family members. But I had no interest in rehashing the sordid details. My focus was on ensuring that my wife and Jay faced the full weight of the law. I met with the police first, handing over all the evidence I had collected: the burner phone, the recordings, and the footage from the hidden cameras. The detectives were impressed with the thoroughness of my investigation. "This is quite a case you've built," Detective Harris said, flipping through the files. "We'll take it from here." "Thank you," I replied. "I just want to make sure they don't get away with this." "They won't," Harris assured me. "We'll bring them in for questioning and proceed with the charges." Next, I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options regarding the divorce. I wanted to ensure that my wife would not benefit from her betrayal. As I sat in the lawyer's office, I recounted the events of the past few months, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "You have a strong case for an at-fault divorce," my lawyer, Ms. Lang, explained. "Given the evidence of her infidelity and the conspiracy to commit robbery, we can argue for a favorable settlement for you." "I don't want her to get a single penny," I said, my voice firm. "She doesn't deserve it." Ms. Lang nodded. "We'll do everything we can to make sure she gets what she deserves." Meanwhile, the police moved quickly. They picked up my wife and Jay for questioning, and it wasn't long before they both confessed to their crimes in full. The evidence was overwhelming, and they had no choice but to cooperate. I was at home, nursing a glass of whiskey, when I got the call from Detective Harris. "We've got their confessions," he said. They admitted to everything: the affair, the robbery, and their plans to run away. "Good," I replied, a sense of vindication washing over me. "What's next?" "They'll be charged with conspiracy to commit robbery, among other things," Harris explained. "They'll likely face significant jail time." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice was being served, but it didn't erase the pain of the betrayal. Still, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I decided to take some time off work to process everything that had happened. My boss was understanding, having heard the rumors and wanting to give me the space I needed. I spent my days dealing with legal matters, and my nights were filled with restless sleep, haunted by memories of what once was. One afternoon, as I was sorting through old photographs, I came across a picture from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so in love. It was hard to reconcile those smiling faces with the reality of our broken marriage. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was over, and it was time to start anew. I reached out to a therapist to help me navigate my emotions. Dr. Collins was compassionate and insightful, helping me understand that it was okay to grieve the loss of my marriage while also feeling justified in my anger. "You've been through a traumatic experience," she said during one of our sessions. "It's important to acknowledge your feelings and give yourself permission to heal." I took her advice to heart, slowly starting to rebuild my life. I reconnected with friends, some of whom I had distanced myself from during my marriage. Their support was a lifeline, helping me remember that I wasn't alone. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with a sense of determination. My wife and Jay were there, looking defeated and resigned. As the proceedings began, I felt a surge of empowerment. This was my moment to reclaim my life and ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. The judge listened intently as the evidence was presented, and it didn't take long for the verdict to come down. They were both found guilty and sentenced to significant jail time. As they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The divorce proceedings were swift, thanks to the mountain of evidence against my wife. I was granted the majority of our assets, and she was left with nothing. It was a hollow victory in some ways, but it was also a necessary one. I could finally close the book on this painful chapter and begin to heal. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of liberation. The road ahead would be challenging, but I knew I was strong enough to face it. I had survived the worst betrayal imaginable, and now it was time to start anew, free from the shadows of my past. With the legal battles behind me, I faced the daunting task of rebuilding my life from the ground up. The weight of betrayal still hung heavy, but I was determined not to let it define me. I needed a fresh start, and that began with reclaiming my home. The house, once a sanctuary of love and trust, had become a monument to deceit. I decided to renovate it, to erase the lingering memories and create a space that was truly mine. I started with the bedroom, new paint, new furniture, and new decorations. The changes were therapeutic, a physical manifestation of the emotional healing I was striving for. One weekend, as I was repainting the living room, I received a visit from my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. She had heard about the party and the fallout, and she wanted to check on me. "You've been through a lot," she said, handing me a plate of freshly baked cookies. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by her kindness. "I appreciate it." Support from friends and neighbors helped, but I knew I needed to build a new routine. I started going to the gym, channeling my anger and frustration into physical activity. The workouts were grueling, but they left me feeling stronger and more in control. Each drop of sweat was a reminder that I was moving forward. I also rekindled old hobbies that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. Photography had always been a passion of mine, and I dusted off my old camera, taking long walks and capturing the beauty of nature. It was a reminder that there was still beauty in the world, even if my personal life had been marred by ugliness. Work became another focus. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office and volunteering for new assignments. My colleagues noticed the change, and their support was unwavering. "You're doing great," my boss said one evening as we wrapped up a meeting. "If you need any more time off or support, just let me know." "Thanks," I said, appreciating the understanding. "I'm just trying to keep busy and move forward." Dr. Collins, my therapist, continued to be a crucial part of my healing process. During our sessions, we delved deeper into my feelings of betrayal and loss, but also into my hopes and dreams for the future. "You've shown incredible resilience," she said during one session. "It's important to acknowledge your progress and to be patient with yourself." One day, I decided to take a trip to the coast, a place where I had always found peace. The ocean had a way of soothing my soul, and I needed its calming influence. I rented a small beach house for the weekend, packed my camera, and set off on a journey of reflection. As I stood on the shore, watching the waves crash against the rocks, I felt a sense of renewal. The vastness of the ocean reminded me that life was full of endless possibilities. I spent the days exploring the coastline, capturing stunning sunsets and the simple beauty of the seagulls in flight. The tranquility of the beach allowed me to reflect on the past and contemplate the future. Returning home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to volunteer at a local shelter, giving back to the community that had supported me. Helping others in need provided a sense of fulfillment and perspective, reminding me that my pain, while significant, was just one part of the human experience. One evening, while sorting through some old files, I stumbled upon a journal I had kept in college. Flipping through its pages, I found entries filled with dreams and aspirations I had long forgotten. It was a poignant reminder of the person I had been before the betrayal, and it inspired me to reconnect with those dreams. I signed up for a photography class at the community center, eager to hone my skills and meet new people. The class was a mix of beginners and seasoned photographers, and it quickly became a highlight of my week. I found myself making friends, sharing stories, and laughing more than I had in a long time. In the midst of all these changes, I began to feel a growing sense of peace. The anger and hurt were still there, but they were no longer the defining aspects of my life. I was rediscovering who I was, independent of the betrayal that had once consumed me. One evening, as I sat on my newly furnished patio, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The journey had been arduous, but I had come out stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. The road to healing was far from over, but I was no longer walking it alone. I had found new passions, new friends, and a renewed sense of self. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to move forward, to continue rebuilding, and to find joy in the simple pleasures of life once more. Despite the progress I was making in rebuilding my life, there was a gnawing sense of unfinished business that I couldn't shake. The betrayal had cut deep, but it was an incident that occurred during the legal proceedings that reignited my desire for revenge. One afternoon, as I was sorting through paperwork for the divorce, I received a call from Ms. Lang, my lawyer. Her tone was serious, a stark contrast to her usual professionalism. "You need to come to the office immediately," she said. "There's something you need to see." Curiosity and concern battled within me as I drove to her office. When I arrived, she handed me a stack of documents, her expression grim. "Your wife has filed a countersuit," she explained. "She's claiming emotional distress and is seeking a substantial portion of your assets." "What?" I nearly shouted. "After everything she did, she's trying to take more from me?" "Ms." Lang nodded. "It gets worse. She's claiming you were abusive, that the stress of your behavior led her to seek solace in her affair." The audacity of her lies left me speechless. I had always treated her with nothing but respect, and now she was trying to rewrite history to paint herself as the victim. It was the ultimate betrayal, and it ignited a fire within me. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "How can she get away with this?" "We'll fight it," Ms. Lang assured me, "but we need to be prepared for a tough battle. She's hired a very aggressive lawyer." As I left the office, a sense of fury washed over me. My wife's attempt to turn the tables and vilify me was the final straw. The pain and humiliation of the affair were one thing, but this was an attack on my very character, and I couldn't let it stand. I spent the next few days gathering even more evidence, determined to prove her lies and protect what was rightfully mine. I combed through every piece of correspondence, every message, every photo that could expose her true nature. It was exhausting work, but the thought of her getting away with her deceit fueled my determination. During this time, I discovered something that added a new layer to my anger. While reviewing her financial records, I found evidence of a secret bank account. She had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for years, slowly building a nest egg for her planned escape with Jay. The amount was staggering, and it was clear she had been planning her betrayal long before the robbery. This revelation hit me like a sledgehammer. Not only had she betrayed me emotionally, but she had also been stealing from me for years. The sheer calculation of her actions was chilling, and it solidified my resolve to see justice served. Armed with this new evidence, I met with Ms. Lang again. "We have to use this," I said, showing her the records. "This proves she was planning to leave long before she claims any abuse occurred." Ms. Lang agreed, and we incorporated the new evidence into our case. The court date loomed, and I steeled myself for the confrontation. I knew it would be ugly, but I was ready. I was fighting not just for my financial security, but for my dignity. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Friends, family, and curious onlookers filled the seats, eager to see the drama unfold. My wife sat across from me, her expression a mix of defiance and feigned innocence. Her lawyer, a smug man with a reputation for ruthless tactics, stood by her side. The proceedings began, and her lawyer launched into a tirade, painting me as a monster who had driven her to desperation. It was infuriating to listen to, but I remained composed, knowing our turn would come. When Ms. Lang presented our case, she did so with precision and confidence. She laid out the evidence of the affair, the robbery, and the secret bank account. The courtroom was silent as she revealed the extent of my wife's deception. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood and addressed the court, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "I loved my wife," I began. "I trusted her completely. She not only betrayed that trust by having an affair and robbing me, but she also tried to destroy my character with lies. The evidence speaks for itself. She was planning to leave long before any of this supposed abuse occurred. This is about greed and betrayal, plain and simple." The judge listened intently, and as I sat down, I felt a sense of relief. I had spoken my truth, and the evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. The judge's verdict came swiftly. My wife's countersuit was dismissed, and she was ordered to repay the stolen money. Additionally, the divorce settlement was heavily skewed in my favor, leaving her with only a fraction of what she had hoped to gain. As she was led away, her face a mask of defeat, I felt a grim satisfaction. She had tried to ruin me, but in the end, justice had prevailed. My path to healing was still long, but I had won a crucial battle. The consequences of her actions had come full circle, and now I could truly begin to move forward. The courtroom victory was bittersweet. Although I had won, the ordeal had taken its toll on me. The betrayal, the lies, and the attempted countersuit had left me with a burning desire for true justice. I wanted to ensure that my wife and her lover faced the full consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about making sure they paid for the pain they had caused. After the court ruling, I sat in my lawyer's office, discussing the next steps. "Ms. Lang," I said, leaning forward, "I want to go after them with everything we've got. I want her life destroyed, and I want him behind bars for as long as possible." Ms. Lang nodded, understanding the depth of my determination. "We have enough evidence to pursue further charges against both of them," she said. "Let's start with the criminal aspect for her lover. The theft and conspiracy charges are already in motion, but we can push for additional charges related to their fraudulent activities." I spent the next few weeks working closely with Ms. Lang and the detectives, providing every bit of information I had uncovered. The secret bank account was a goldmine, revealing a pattern of financial fraud that extended beyond the theft from our joint accounts. They had been involved in a series of small-scale scams, siphoning money from unsuspecting victims to fund their lifestyle. The more we dug, the more their house of cards began to collapse. We discovered that Jay had a history of petty crimes, and that this wasn't the first time he had been involved in such schemes. This new evidence strengthened the case against him, and the detectives were eager to bring him to justice. One afternoon, I received a call from Detective Harris. "We've got enough to arrest Jay on multiple charges," he said. "We'll pick him up tonight." That evening, I watched from a distance as the police surrounded his apartment. Jay was led out in handcuffs, his defiance replaced by a look of fear. It was a satisfying sight, knowing that he would finally face the consequences of his actions. But my work wasn't done yet. My wife's fate was now in the hands of the legal system. I wanted to ensure that she couldn't simply start over and continue her deceitful ways. I began to reach out to everyone she knew, her friends, her family, her colleagues, exposing her lies and her betrayal. I sent copies of the court transcripts, the evidence of her affair, and the details of her fraudulent activities. I wanted everyone to see her for who she really was. Her social circle quickly dissolved. Friends turned their backs on her. Family members distanced themselves, and her professional reputation was in tatters. She lost her job, and with her criminal record, finding new employment would be nearly impossible. The life she had tried to build on the foundation of lies and deceit was crumbling around her. One evening, as I sat on my newly renovated patio, I received a message from an unknown number. It was from my wife. The tone of the message was desperate and pleading. "Please," she wrote, "you've taken everything from me. I'm begging you to stop. I can't take it anymore." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "You brought this on yourself. This is the consequence of your actions. If you want it to stop, turn yourself in and confess everything." Days passed with no response, but I knew she had no other options left. The pressure was mounting, and she was trapped. Eventually, news came that she had walked into the police station and confessed to her part in the conspiracy and the theft. Her plea for leniency was denied, and she was sentenced to several years in prison. With both my wife and her lover behind bars, I finally felt a sense of closure. Their attempts to ruin my life had failed, and they were now paying the price for their actions. The path to healing was still long, but I could now walk it without the shadow of their betrayal looming over me. I took one last look at the evidence and the documents that had consumed my life for so long. With a deep breath, I fed them into the shredder, watching as the remnants of my past were reduced to confetti. It was symbolic, a way of saying goodbye to the pain and embracing the future. As the sun set on the horizon, I raised a glass of whiskey to the new life ahead of me. Justice had been served, and I was free to rebuild, stronger and wiser. The road had been long and painful, but I had emerged victorious. And now I could finally find peace. With my wife and her lover behind bars, the dust began to settle on the chaos that had upended my life. The whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil had left me drained, but also strangely invigorated. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and come out stronger on the other side. Now, it was time to find peace and move forward. I took some time off from work and decided to travel. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had put off for years. With a backpack and my camera, I set out to explore new places and rediscover myself. The first stop was a remote village in the mountains, a place of serene beauty and quiet reflection. The days were filled with long hikes, capturing stunning landscapes, and immersing myself in the local culture. I found solace in the simplicity of nature, away from the noise and distractions of my previous life. The villagers were welcoming, and their stories of resilience and community inspired me. One evening, as I was photographing a particularly breathtaking sunset, a local woman named Anna approached me. She had noticed my constant presence with the camera and struck up a conversation. Anna was an artist, and we quickly bonded over our shared love for capturing beauty through different mediums. As we spent more time together, Anna became a friend and a confidant. We talked about life, loss, and the journey of healing. Her wisdom and kindness were a balm for my wounded soul. She showed me the importance of living in the moment and finding joy in the little things. "I've been through my own share of heartache," she said one evening as we watched the stars. "But it's the pain that makes us appreciate the beauty in life. It's the struggles that shape us into who we are." Her words resonated deeply with me. I realized that my journey was not just about seeking revenge or justice. It was about finding myself again and creating a life filled with meaning and happiness. After a few weeks in the mountains, I continued my travels, visiting bustling cities, tranquil beaches, and historic sites. Each place offered new experiences and lessons. I met people from all walks of life, each with their own stories of triumph and tragedy. These encounters enriched my understanding of the world and my place in it. Returning home, I felt a sense of renewal. My house, once a place of betrayal, had been transformed into a sanctuary. The renovations were complete, and the space felt truly mine. I filled it with memories from my travels, photographs, souvenirs, and artifacts that reminded me of my journey and the people I had met. I also reconnected with old friends and strengthened my bonds with family. Their unwavering support had been a pillar of strength throughout the ordeal, and I wanted to show them my gratitude. We spent time together, creating new memories and celebrating the simple joys of life. Work took on a new meaning as well. I was more focused and driven, channeling my energy into projects that were both challenging and fulfilling. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and their support was heartwarming. One evening, as I was sorting through my travel photos, I received a letter from Anna. She had sent a painting she had made, inspired by our conversations and my journey. The painting depicted a phoenix rising from the ashes, a powerful symbol of rebirth and renewal. Tears filled my eyes as I hung the painting in my living room. It was a perfect representation of my transformation, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and loss, we have the power to rise and rebuild. Looking back, I realized that the journey had been about more than just revenge or justice. It had been about reclaiming my life, rediscovering my passions, and finding peace within myself. The pain of the past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future. As the sun set on another day, I sat on my patio, savoring the tranquility of the moment. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced my demons and come out victorious. Now, it was time to live, to love, and to find joy in the journey ahead. With a deep breath, I raised my glass to the future. Whatever it held, I knew I was ready. I had found my peace, and I was finally free.